Who are the most violent Space Marines? The Black Templar. But who else are the most violent Space Marines? The Space Wolves. But who else are the most violent Space Marines? The Blood Angels. If I didn't play Black Templar, I'd probably do Space Wolves, but if I didn't play Space Wolves, I would probably play Blood Angels, and I want to play Pretend today. What would it be like to be a Blood Angels player? The Blood Angels are all about close combat, so I think an Assault Intercessor is the true rank and file for the army. I grabbed him a chainsword and a heavy bolt pistol for the Marine. There aren't a lot of other bits that are super Blood Angels-y. They're a little bit like the Ultramarines, just proud Codex-compliant Space Marines. I drilled out the barrel with my hobby pin vise and gave him a turning pose, like he's just spotted his next target and is moving into action. So what makes the Blood Angels not the Ultramarines? Well, their detachment ability, Red Thirst, is kind of interesting and kind of weird. It's +2 strength and +1 attack on the charge for any Adeptus Astartes unit. Makes things like Assault Intercessors quite a bit better. They're wounding Marine equivalents on 3s and they get that plus attack. And you just get weird stuff like Rhinos hitting on strength or hitting with strength 8. But it's not that good as far as detachments go. And the stratagems don't get me super excited. I feel like the thing that makes the Blood Angels right now, is their specific unit, the Death Company. The Death Company Space Marines are kind of a weird holdover from the Squatty Marine days. They were essentially Assault Marines who could take any weapon in the Space Marine armory. Now, in 10th edition and the time of free war gear, that means every single guy has a Power Fist. And remember that Power Fist gets +1 attack on the charge, +2 strength, so those are all strength 10 Power Fists. And it gets even crazier when you add in the Red Rage stratagem, which gives you lance and lethal hits. So imagine this. 40 attacks hitting on 3s, re-rolling +1 to wound. So the toughest things in the game, they're wounding on 4s. Everything else is 3s. That is an absurd level of power. And then at the very end of that, damage to 2 wounds. That isn't anything in the game killer. That can kill an Imperial Knight. As a Black Templar player and a lover of close combat, Blood Angels, I salute you. For his helmet, I want to run a little experiment. I want to fill in his face grills, and I feel like it might give him a more refined look. I mixed up some milliput and squished it into the front of his helmet. It's a little tricky to do this because he's so small, I can't quite get it perfect in one go, so I'll have to wait for it to dry and then sand it. Alongside the milliput, I decided to try some Tamiya texture paste. This stuff starts out much wetter and stickier than the milliput, so it went onto his face easier, but I'll still have to sand it later. While those heads are drying, I decided to have a little fun with his shoulder pad. I took an Assault Intercessor shoulder pad and stuck a piece of double stick tape behind it and started putting down small drops of superglue and then pouring baking soda on top of it. The baking soda makes the superglue cure instantly into a really hard resin-like material. I sanded the dried glue flat to the shoulder and then I cut it into the basic shape I want and then tore off the tape. I want to create a teardrop shape, which is a symbol of the Blood Angels, and I use my Dremel tool to refine this into an elegant droplet. It takes advantage of the round shape of the shoulder pad and makes the Blood Angel that much fancier. I got my Space Marine ready for priming, but then I had a thought. The superglue worked really well on the shoulder pad, why not for the face grills? I poured it on and it was a mess. The glue immediately flooded his whole face, filling in his eyes and mask, and basically getting everywhere except his grill. And even after some cleanup and sanding, I couldn't save it. I took the milliput and Tamiya putty heads and gave these a careful sanding with a fine grit sanding twig, and they both turned out pretty good. It's hard to tell if they're perfect or not, I'll just have to wait and see what happens when the paint goes on. I put the head onto my Marine and my Blood Angel was ready for action. Well, for my Space Marine helmet experiment, the superglue was kind of a disaster. It's just way too runny and it went right into the cracks and ruined the helmet. The Tamiya basic putty wasn't bad and probably dried a little quicker than the milliput, but it's really sticky and it's hard to get it into the grills perfectly. The milliput was definitely the easiest and the best option. But now, it's time to get some paint on this sucker. And speaking of getting paint on this sucker, that's gonna be super easy with today's sponsor, Huge Miniatures. Huge Miniatures is a game and modeling supply company that is a one-stop shop for your painting and modeling needs. They have a huge range of scale modeling and scenery supplies, all manufactured in the US of A. I discovered them through their weathering powders and I've been hooked ever since. Their acrylic paint has good coverage and they have an extensive catalog of airbrush colors, perfectly formulated to run smoothly through your airbrush, producing no clogs and minimal cleanup. And if you need to build some bases, Huge Minis has you covered. They have everything from texture paste, flocks and sand, and every different size, shape, and color to get your models tabletop ready. And their latest new product line is very exciting, Color Shift Paints. Colors that change depending on how you're looking at the model. Perfect for adding an otherworldly or magical effect to your minis. A big thanks to Huge Miniatures for sponsoring and supplying the material to paint this Blood Angel. If you want to give their products a try for yourself, you can use the coupon code EonsOfBattle for a 5% discount. For my Blood Angel, I think an arid desert landscape will be the best look. I tore off some cork in the shape of the base and then glued it down with plenty of ultra-thin superglue. Then I took my Dremel tool and ground down the surface to make it uneven and more natural. Then I primed the base and the marine black. Returning to the base, I started working on the base first, as I'll be using some special effects products that need time to dry. I airbrushed brown over the base and gave it a dry brushing with some dark tan. Then I broke out the Huge Mini Desert Texture Paste. I smeared this stuff over 75% of the base, going about 1mm thick. Then I got the Huge Miniatures Barren Crackle Paste and filled in the rest of the base, mushing it into the sand texture to mix them so there's no hard edge between the two materials. Now to set that aside so it has time to dry and crack, and it's time for my marine. For Blood Angels, I can't imagine base coating with any other color than red. To make a dark red that's still really vibrant, I mixed in a dark purple instead of black, base coating the entire model. Then I sprayed pure red from above, a little like a zenithal, but instead of showing me a color map with a light at its zenith, it's giving me my bright red armor nearly perfectly in 2 steps. Making good red armor is a little tricky because red can't be lightened or darkened much without changing it into pink or orange, so I mixed up an orangey color using a little bit of the red armor color to help make it look more natural and started edge highlighting. Not hitting every single edge like the Games Workshop box art does, just the raised areas and some of the easiest to pick out details. Those would be the first ones to be hit by the sun anyway. Once I had him oranged, I went back in with yellow and edge highlighted over the orange just a little bit, like his armor is super clean and reflective. His red armor is complete and it took a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but that's okay because I felt like dry brushing would leave behind too much orange and make him too orangey, and washes would have made him a little bit too dark. So I think the heavy metal edge highlights was the way to go to keep his armor Blood Angels red. And it's really good practice because in the not so distant future, I'm gonna be painting up a lot of Blood Angels. I have got a 2016 4th edition copy of Space Hulk, mint in box. Oh, and I'm really excited about this guy. But first, I gotta finish this guy. I put some black paint onto my palette and hit all his not red parts, on his knee pads, the in-between parts of his armor, and his weapons. Blood Angel's troopers wear all red, the lieutenants wear black on their shoulder pads. One thing I really like about Huge Miniatures black is it dries a little bit glossy, so the black looks super black. I took a gray paint and did a few highlights on his Aquila and weapons, and I base coated his teardrop accent with an earth brown as a base coat in preparation for gold, applying this in a few thin coats for maximum glitter factor. I also painted his weapons with silver paint. Now he's getting pretty close to done, I want to spend some quality time with his chainsword. I used white paint to start laying down hazard stripes, going back and forth with black and white until I had nice parallel lines. Then I painted over the white with a yellow, and once it was dry, I took an orange and glazed this over the back half of the stripes for a gradient. Now my marine is kinda done, but he doesn't really feel done to me, so there's a few tricks I want to try on him. I put Huge Miniatures Light Wash and Dark Star Purple Wash onto my palette and glazed the purple over the underside of his armor to darken them, shading the recesses and making the overall contrast more intense, and I put Brown Wash over the gold. I went back to his weapons with a dry brushing of gray, and on the teeth of his chainsword, I loaded up my paintbrush with black paint and dragged it over the sword, making a million little black streaks, and then I did this again with light gray to make it look like the paint near the business end of the sword is worn down. Now he's looking much better to me, it's time for the decals. I wish I had a new Blood Angels transfer sheet. Games Workshop's current decals are better than their old ones, but I may do with one from my collection of 2015 Space Marine decals. I softened it up and squished it onto his shoulder pad. On his right shoulder, he wears a yellow teardrop. The yellow decal is very transparent, so I painted on top of the decal with white and yellow to brighten it up and give it a gradient to make it look more interesting. He's getting really close now, it's time for the eyes. Blood Angel's eyes glow green, which is a great color for the red armor, and those eyes are really gonna shine out of the no-grill helmet. This intercessor has a tactical rock, so I prepped this by painting it the same colors I plan to paint the base. I've made a discovery while painting up this Blood Angel, and that is the Blood Angels look really correct in clean, pristine armor. Because that's kind of what their chapter is. They're the cleanest, most pristine, most noble, most honorable Space Marines. But under the surface, they're all doomed. In classic 40k fashion, all of the Blood Angels will one day succumb to the Red Thirst. They're racked by visions of Horus slaying their Primarch Sanguinius, and they're filled with nothing but rage and bloodlust. And as they serve in the Blood Angels, these visions will get longer and longer until one day, all they can do is be a giant, rageful murder machine. And when that happens, they're given a power fist and black armor and told to go charge a Chaos Knight in glorious hand-to-hand combat. The Blood Angels are pretty cool. And it's time to get this little doomed Space Marine onto his base. The texture paste and crackle medium have done their job and are now dry enough to paint. I airbrushed over them with a light beige color and then super glued down my Marine, adding a little more texture paste around his tactical rock to integrate it more convincingly into the base. I hit this fresh goo with my hairdryer to get it dry enough to paint the beige color on top of it. But you know it's always dry enough? That's right, our Patreon. This month we have the mining colony, terrain, and vehicles. Utilitarian machines that are more than they appear, designed to ride across the landscape firing stolen weapons or tunneling underneath to lay traps. And the mines and containers make for thematic and useful terrain. The colony is ready to uprise. Then I took my huge mini light wash, thinned down, and put this over the earth, tinting it a yucky brown color, a strikingly different color from his elegant red armor. I attached some huge miniatures desert mini tufts that are the perfect match for the wash I used, and this might be one of my favorite bases ever. Incredibly easy and it looks great. The last thing to add is some huge mini sand texture powder to make it look like my Marine really is wandering through a dusty field. I smeared this on and let it dry. The pigment looks very different wet versus dry, and once it was dry, I went back in with a damp brush and knocked off any pigments I wasn't happy with. Once he was done, I gave him a black base rim, and this little space vampire is ready to crusade. Thanks again, Huge Miniatures, for sponsoring this Blood Angel. With this Space Marine, I feel like I've finally painted a model that matches my hypothesis that dark colored models should stand on a light colored base and light colored models should stand on a dark colored base. Because, to be honest, I wasn't really feeling this sucker until I got him on the base. And now that he's on the base, I really like him. Like if my Black Templar transformed into Blood Angels overnight, like this Blood Angel, I would be pretty happy. Maybe change the Crusader squads into Death Company, but it would be pretty sick. I've really been enjoying going down this rabbit hole of what if I played this chapter, what if I played this chapter, but please let me know in the comments below what Space Marine chapter I should look at next. I've done most of the first founding, but there's still so many Space Marines to explore, so let me know what I should work on next.